Welcome to Ethan's Revenge Domain.
She has a master's in business. You're just an engineer. Karen from HR didn't even look up when she said it. Her eyes stayed locked on the printed document in front of her, pen hovering over a checklist like my entire career was just another box she had to tick before lunch. We were in conference room 4B, the small one with no windows and a thermostat that was always set 2 degrees too cold, neutral gray walls, a crooked motivational poster about teamwork. A box of tissues placed carefully on a shelf, as if the company wanted credit for empathy it never actually showed. The invite had landed on my calendar at 9:07 a.m. Compensation review confidential. No agenda, no context. Just that one phrase everybody in a corporate job learns to dread. Nothing good ever happens in a meeting HR schedules with confidential in the subject line. Karen slid the paper across the laminate table. Her nails were perfect. Subtle nude polish, no chips. The kind of detail you notice when someone refuses to meet your eyes. This is your updated compensation package for the upcoming fiscal year, she said, voice flat and even. The voice of someone who has practiced delivering bad news in a way that makes it sound like a policy, not a choice. You'll see your merit increase highlighted here. I exhaled once and looked down. Job title, Senior Site Reliability Engineer tenure, 7 years, 11 months base salary adjustment, plus 3% underneath in thinner font. Compensation aligned with internal equity guidelines. That phrase again. Internal equity guidelines, corporate code for, we've decided what you're worth and your opinion is not part of the calculation. 3%, I said. Correct, Karen replied. That's within the standard band for senior technical contributors. I set the paper down and leaned back in the chair. It creaked like it disagreed with her. What about Amara? I asked. Her pen paused for just a fraction of a second. Then the smile appeared professional, polite, careful. I'm not sure what you mean, she said. Amara Desai, I said. The new director of operations, started 3 months ago. No prior experience in infrastructure. I saw her offer letter. The smile tightened. I can't discuss another employee's compensation with you. She's making double what I make, isn't she? I asked. Karen put the pen down, folding her hands on top of the paperwork like she was bracing for impact. Amara has different qualifications, she said finally. Like what? She has a Master in Business Administration from a top-tier program, Karen said, straightening in her chair as if the credential itself added weight to her argument. You're just an engineer. Different roles require different market positioning. Just an engineer. The words hit harder than the 3%. Just an engineer, I repeated slowly, letting each word land between us. The just who built the alerting system that caught the clearinghouse failure before it cost us $7 million in penalties. The just who designed the database sharding strategy that kept us online when your biggest client tripled their traffic in 1 quarter. That just, Karen's jaw tightened. Eli, I understand you're frustrated. I'm not frustrated, I said. I'm listening, because what I'm hearing is that someone with an MBA and 0 experience in our tech stack is worth twice what I am, and I want to be absolutely sure that's the company's position. She folded her hands tighter. We benchmark compensation against external market data, she said, voice cooling. Leadership roles command higher salaries. That's industry standard. Education, scope of responsibility, and title all factor in. We have to maintain fairness across the organization. Fairness, I said. Interesting word. Her eyes finally lifted to meet mine. We value all our employees, she recited, but we also have to ensure people understand their place in the structure. Know your place, she didn't say it exactly like that, but the meaning was stamped into every carefully chosen word. I looked at her, at the checklist, at the line internal equity guidelines printed like a verdict. Then I reached into my bag. Karen's shoulders tensed slightly, like she expected a list of grievances, or a printed market report, or maybe the card of a lawyer. Instead, I took out a single folded sheet of paper and placed it gently on top of the compensation document. Clean white, 3 paragraphs, already signed. Her gaze flicked down. Her face lost color as she read the first line. Effective immediately, it said. I resigned from my position as Senior Site Reliability Engineer at LumaQuant Analytics. Eli. She started. I sent a copy to your email at 9:47 a.m., I said calmly. You should see it in your inbox now. It's also CC'd to my manager and to the VP of engineering." She scanned the date, the signature, the final line. "You don't have to make this decision right now," she said quickly, the HR mask slipping at the edges. "This is a big step. Talk to your manager. We can revisit the numbers." "Maybe there's flexibility. I've been revisiting the numbers for 7 years," I said. "This isn't impulsive. This is overdue." Her eyes hardened. "You're overreacting. This is how the market values different roles. Amara is being paid appropriately for her responsibilities. You are being paid appropriately for yours." "Exactly," I said, standing up. "You just told me my place." I picked up my bag. "And I'm telling you," I added, "it's not here." I left the resignation letter on the table. At 9:49 a.m., I walked out of conference room 4B at 9:52 a.m. My badge was flagged for deactivation. At 9:57 a.m., my accounts were placed into offboarding mode in 12 production environments. At 10:06 a.m., I dropped my laptop and access card at security, signed a form I didn't bother reading, and walked out of the building I'd held together for nearly 8 years. At 10:21 a.m., the first alert fired in the Network Operations Center. At 10:28 a.m., every on-call engineer was in full crisis mode, staring at graphs they didn't understand and logs they'd never seen before. And at exactly 10:33 a.m., 46 minutes after Karen told me I was just an engineer and to know my place, Ryan Cho, the VP of engineering, was standing outside my apartment door, tie crooked, hair out of place, knocking like a man who just discovered what happens when the one person who understands the wiring walks away. "Eli," he said the moment I opened the door, not even bothering with hello. "We need you back, right now." He looked nothing like the polished executive who usually drifted through all-hands meetings with a calm smile and a slide deck. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, the collar of his dress shirt was open like he'd yanked the tie loose in the elevator. "I don't work there anymore," I said. "I know," he said, voice tight. "But the platform is melting down. Payments are stuck. The overnight reconciliation jobs failed. Dashboards are red across the board. Nobody can trace the root cause. The team says these are your parts." "My parts," I repeated. "Just for today," he said. "We'll pay you consulting rate, double your hourly, whatever you want. Just come in and stabilize things, please." I leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. 46 minutes ago," I said, "your company told me that someone with a master's degree in PowerPoint was worth twice what I am. They told me to know my place." He swallowed. "That wasn't me." "No," I said, "but it was the company." "You're just here to carry the consequences." "Is there anything I can say to get you to help?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You can say this: we made a mistake. We underpaid and disrespected you for years. We created a single point of failure by depending on you without valuing you. That's not your problem to fix anymore." He stared at me. "We made a mistake," he said finally. I shook my head. "You're saying it because the system is on fire," I said, "not because you believe it." And I meant what I wrote in my letter. I'm done putting out fires for people who think I'm just an engineer until something breaks. "Eli, please," he said. "Clients are threatening to walk. We're minutes from catastrophe." "I warned you about catastrophe 3 years ago," I said, in a 30-page deck nobody read because it didn't have an MBA attached to it. I started closing the door. "Go see if Amara can fix it," I said. "She's the one you decided was worth double." The door clicked shut between us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and show you exactly how a quiet infrastructure engineer, 8 years of ignored warnings, and one HR sentence about knowing your place, turned into the most expensive 46 minutes in Lumaquant's history. If stories like this hit too close to home, if you've ever been told you're just anything while you hold the system together, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories help the people who actually keep the lights on remember they're not crazy, and they're not powerless. Now, let's go back to where this really started. My name is Eli Ward. I'm 38 years old. I don't have a master's in business. I don't have a blue-chip pedigree. What I do have is a bachelor's degree in computer science from a state college nobody puts on recruiting posters. 4 years on graveyard shift in a data center where servers failed loudly and managers failed quietly. Nearly 8 years of watching one fintech company stack profits on top of systems held together by people who were always paid less than the people standing on their work. Before LumaQuant Analytics ever sent me a calendar invite with confidential in the subject line, I learned 2 rules that have defined my career. Rule 1. Systems fail in patterns. If you learn the patterns, you can see the future 10 minutes before everyone else. Rule 2. The people who care most about the patterns are almost never the ones with chief in their title. The data center where I started was an old concrete building on the edge of an industrial park. No windows, constant hum, fluorescent lights that flickered just enough to make you question your own sanity at 3 in the morning. I worked the overnight shift with 2 other technicians and a stack of escalation runbooks that assumed the world was simple. If server A stops responding, restart service B. If cluster C shows degraded performance, reboot node D. Reality wasn't that clean. Sometimes 3 things failed at once for reasons no one had written down. Sometimes the runbook was out of date by 2 years and following it would make things worse. Sometimes the problem wasn't the hardware at all, but a chain of assumptions made by someone who'd written code in an office miles away, never once feeling the heat of a rack throwing a thermal warning at 2:13 a.m. That job taught me more than school ever did. I learned to read logs like stories, to see the rhythm of normal behavior and the subtle shifts that signaled trouble, to trace a symptom backward through layers until I found the small, forgotten setting that had been wrong for months and only now decided to matter. More importantly, I learned what it felt like to be necessary and invisible at the same time. When we kept things running, no one noticed. When things broke, it was our fault for not predicting the unpredictable. By year 4, I was good. Too good to stay in a basement resetting crashed services for people who never saw my name. That's when LumaQuant called. On paper, LumaQuant Analytics was a real-time decision intelligence platform for institutional finance. In reality, it was a complicated mess of ingestion services pulling live market feeds and client data processing engines, crunching risk and pricing models, API layers serving dashboards to executives who like to pretend they understood the math, batch jobs reconciling everything overnight while everyone slept when I arrived for my interview. The then CTO, a guy named Arjun Rao, didn't bother trying to impress me with buzzwords. He put a diagram on the whiteboard that looked like someone had fired a shotgun at a network map. "Can you keep this from killing us?" he asked. "Depends," I said. "Can I change anything, or do you just want someone to babysit the mess?" "If you can prove it needs changing, you can change it," he said. "If you just want to complain about it, you can go back to the data center." "I'll take the job," I replied. He laughed once, then shook my hand. The first month, I didn't touch anything. I watched every incident page, every error spike, every 2 a.m. Slack thread where junior engineers panicked and senior engineers pretended not to. I built my own map of the system, not the official architecture that got shown to investors. The real one, the unlogged cron job that reconciled edge case transactions at 3:12 a.m. on Tuesdays. The ancient microservice everyone was afraid to deploy because no one remembered who wrote it. The failover configuration that sounded robust on slides but had never actually been tested end to end. I started a notebook, paper, not digital. Whenever something broke, I wrote it down. What failed, how it failed, what the earliest warning had been, what we did to fix it, whether that fix removed the root cause, or just reset the countdown timer by the end of month 3. That notebook was more valuable than any documentation the company had officially produced in 5 years. I showed Arjun my list of top 10 likely catastrophes. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a committee. "How long to fix?" he asked. 6 months if you give me space," I said. "Longer if I have to fight every change with somebody's roadmap." "You can have 6 months," he said. "You can't have a catastrophe." So I went to work. Monitoring came first. You can't defend what you can't see. And what LumaQuant could see when I arrived was red light, green light. I built an observability stack that told us not just alive or dead, but latency distributions, error rate baselines, queue depths over time, memory pressure, leading indicators, thread pool saturation patterns. I set thresholds not by guessing, but by watching normal days and mapping where the edges really were. Then I wired alerts not to thing is broken, but to thing is behaving unusually in a way that has historically preceded broken. After that, I tackled failover. The official story was that LumaQuant was multi-region. The truth was that we had one data center and a backup region nobody had ever pointed production traffic at. We ran a full failover test one Saturday. Everything broke. DNS, caches, session stores, third-party connections with hard-coded IPs. All the things nobody thinks about when they say, we'll just fail over. It took us 6 hours to get the backup region to limp along, weeks to fix what we uncovered that day. But by the end of it, we had tested runbooks. We had diagrams that reflected reality. We had muscle memory. We had, for the first time, something that earned the right to be called resilience. Over the next few years, my title stayed the same, Senior Site Reliability Engineer. But my actual job description became something much larger. The person who knew how all the pieces really fit together, the person people called first when something behaved strangely, the person who'd seen obscure failure mode X back in 2019 and remembered the one log line that gave it away when something went wrong. Executives stopped asking, "Who's on call?" and started asking, "Where's Eli?" I didn't ask for that. It just happened. Every time I fixed something deeply broken at 2:17 a.m., I added a new page to my notebook. Every time I wrote a runbook, I tried to turn my scars into instructions someone else could follow. I believed naively that this was what loyalty looked like from my side. Work hard, keep the company safe, share knowledge. Eventually, someone notices. Someone did notice, but not the way I'd expected. LumaQuant grew. Revenue up, new clients onboarded, decks with upward sloping lines presented to the board. With growth came professionalization. The original CEO, a product guy who'd at least tried to understand the tech, stepped aside. The board brought in a new CEO from private equity. His name was Grant Mercer. Grant liked phrases like operational excellence, strategic realignment, unlocking stakeholder value. He did not particularly like phrases like kernel panic, right amplification. This is going to fall over if we keep ignoring it. Within 6 months, he had reorganized the org chart, brought in experienced leaders from other companies, hired a director of operations to streamline cross-functional execution. That director was Amara. Amara was smart in the way polished people are smart. Top 10 MBA. Big name consulting firm on her resume. Impeccable slides. A knack for translating vague executive desires into bullet points. Her job, according to the email announcement, was to align technical initiatives with business objectives and increase operational leverage. Translation: sit in meetings, ask broad questions, make sure everything sounded strategic to someone who didn't understand details at first. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. She asked questions like, why can't we deploy twice as often? And what would it take to cut incident response time in half? Good questions on the surface. The problem wasn't the questions. It was that she didn't care about the answers. Whenever I explained, if we deploy twice as often with our current test coverage, we'll double change induced failures. Or we can cut response time if we invest in on-call training and deeper runbooks, but that takes time and budget. She nodded, smiled, then went into another meeting and said, engineering is resisting change. We need to push harder. Her presentations were beautiful: heat maps, confidence intervals, initiative dashboards. Every time I raised a risk, it showed up in her deck as a dependency that someone else could own. She was very good at making executives feel like problems were being handled. She was very bad at actually changing the underlying reality. The gap between what Amara was paid and what I was paid eventually slipped out in the most banal way possible: a misaddressed PDF. Our HR generalist forwarded a bundle of comp adjustment letters to the wrong internal list. They realized it within a minute and recalled the email. Recall doesn't erase attachments. I opened one out of reflex before the recall hit. It was Amara's. Base salary, $192,000 annual bonus target, 30% equity refresh, 20,000 RSUs. I stared at it. Then I opened my last review. Base salary, $96,000 annual bonus target, 10% equity. Nothing since my initial grant 6 years earlier. We were not doing the same job. But we were not, by any definition that included reality, bringing the same value. The next time I was up at 2:41 a.m. manually clearing a stuck job that blocked $40 million in daily transaction flow, I thought about that number. 192K. I wasn't angry yet. Just recalibrating. That's when the recruiters I'd been ignoring for years stopped sounding like spam and started sounding like exits. 2 months before the compensation meeting, I updated my resume, not with buzzwords. With facts, designed and implemented multi-region failover strategy, reducing potential downtime from hours to minutes. Built observability stack that detected critical incidents up to 20 minutes before impact. Led response to major payment pipeline incident, preventing an estimated $7 in SLA penalties. I took 3 calls, one with a cloud provider, one with a security firm, one with a logistics platform whose stack looked like ours, just slightly less cursed. 2 of them made offers. Both were higher than what LumaQuant was paying me. The third said, "We don't have a role yet, but if you ever get tired of being taken for granted, call us." I tucked that sentence away. Then I went back to work, because despite everything, I still foolishly believed the company that depended on me so heavily would eventually adjust. They did adjust, just not the way I expected. The compensation review meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. I printed my resignation letter Monday night, not because I was sure I'd use it, because I wanted the option to stop negotiating with people who'd already told me my ceiling. So when Karen said she has a master's in business, "You're just an engineer," and followed it with, "We have to maintain fairness. Know your place," the decision wasn't born in that moment. It was just finalized. You know the rest of that scene. The paper, the signature, the look on her face. And then 9:49 a.m. I walked out. 9:57 a.m. badge disabled. 10:06 a.m. equipment returned. 10:21 a.m. first critical alert. 10:33 a.m. Ryan at my door, suddenly very aware of my place. What happened in those 46 minutes? Not magic, not sabotage, just math. LumaQuant had a complex nightly batch pipeline that pulled data from client systems, normalized it, ran pricing and risk models, generated position and exposure reports, fed those into a payment scheduling system. By 9:30 a.m. every business day, it was the financial equivalent of a circulatory system. If it worked, clients got what they needed and money flowed. If it didn't, everything else became irrelevant. 18 months earlier, I discovered a subtle bug. Under certain conditions, usually after a day with unusually high market volatility, the job that reconciled intraday adjustments would push the queue depth on a particular message broker just past a threshold where back pressure kicked in, but not far enough to trigger the old alerts. The effect: everything slowed, then timed out, then retried, then cascaded. I wrote a detailed post-mortem. I added a new metric. I configured a synthetic check to exercise that path regularly. I documented the exact recovery steps on an internal page nobody outside SRE ever read. I fixed the root cause, but I also knew, without someone who remembered that incident, the pattern would look like a brand new, terrifying failure. When I walked out at 9:49 a.m., that particular synthetic check was firing. The only person who both recognized it as the early warning of a known pattern and trusted themselves enough to act without asking permission was on a sidewalk heading home. The engineers who were left weren't incompetent. They just hadn't been in the trenches as long. When the alerts fired, they did what they'd been trained to do. Checked the dashboards, verified services were up, confirmed CPU and memory weren't pegged, restarted a couple of pods, just in case. The problem wasn't a pod. It was the slow accumulation of messages in a part of the system they didn't even know existed until that morning. Amara walked into the war room 20 minutes into the incident. "Why is everything red?" she asked. "We're seeing elevated latency in the reporting pipeline," one of the engineers said. "Payments are backing up. Can we roll back the last release?" she asked. "There wasn't one," he said. This isn't a deploy issue. Then reboot something, she snapped. Can't sit here analyzing while clients are offline. That's how people who live in PowerPoint think outages work. Turn it off, turn it on, hope the graph goes down. They restarted a critical service. It cleared some threads, dropped some connections, and triggered a hidden rate limit downstream that I'd found once 3 years ago on an internal vendor API. That limit had a nasty side effect. When you hammered it too hard, it started dropping requests on the floor. No errors, no logs. Just silence. The engineers watched as half their jobs went from slow but progressing to apparently done. They weren't done. They were missing. By the time Ryan understood this wasn't a typical incident, they weren't just facing delays. They were facing data inconsistency. In a financial system, that's worse than downtime. That's when he came to my door. The outage lasted 9 hours. They eventually found my old documentation. An engineer named Tessa, who'd only been at the company a year, dug through the archives of our internal wiki and found a page titled Batch Pipeline, Known Failure Modes and Recovery Procedures eWard. Of course it was buried 2 folders deep in legacy SRE docs. Of course it hadn't been updated to the pretty new template ops liked. Of course that meant nobody had looked at it in over a year. She followed the steps. Drained the overloaded queue, carefully paused non-critical downstream jobs, replayed only idempotent messages in controlled batches, verified reconciliations before re-enabling external interfaces. It worked. She saved them. Later, one of the engineers messaged me from a personal account. Your old docs saved the day. They're acting like heroes. Most of them don't realize the only reason we got out is because you predicted this 2 years ago. I didn't feel anger reading that. I felt done. Because the problem had never been whether they needed me. They did. The problem was whether they respected that fact enough to treat me accordingly. They hadn't. So when Ryan was at my door asking for one more miracle, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about every time I'd been called just an engineer in more polite language, every 3% raise, every avoided bonus conversation. Every time someone like Amara took my warnings, smoothed out the edges, and turned them into talking points instead of actions. LumaQuant didn't need another save. They needed a consequence. In the months that followed, here's what I heard piece by piece from people who still worked there. 2 of LumaQuant's biggest clients invoked penalty clauses. 1 terminated their contract entirely. The board commissioned an external review. That review used the phrase catastrophic reliance on undervalued single points of failure. Internal equity guidelines looked different after that. The following quarter, SRE salary bands were raised by 30–40%. A principal engineer track, something I'd been asking for years, was created. Knowledge sharing became a strategic initiative. It was all correct, and entirely too late for me. By then, I was already 6 months into my new role at a company that treated just an engineer like the most important words in the building. The new company, Halcyon Metrics, was a performance analytics platform in a different vertical, but with the same underlying complexity. When I interviewed with them, their VP of engineering, a woman named Yara, asked one question that told me everything I needed to know. What's something you insisted on at your last company that they ignored and later regretted? I told her about. The queue, the synthetic check, the ignored docs, the 9-hour outage. She listened without interrupting. When you tell people something like that here, she said, we're going to annoy you with follow-up questions until we understand it, and then we're going to act. Because we've already paid the price of not listening to people like you, we don't intend to pay it twice. Their offer was $170 K base 20% bonus target, a clear path to a distinguished engineer role. I accepted. 16 months later, I was making more than double my last LumaQuant salary. But here's the important part. Nobody at Halcyon has ever said just an engineer to me. Instead, I hear, what does Eli think? What pattern are we missing? If he says this will break, we slow down. They don't worship me, they respect the work. They treat institutional knowledge like an asset, not an accident. 3 years after I left LumaQuant, I got an email from Ryan. Subject, I owe you an apology. He didn't make excuses. He wrote, you were right. We created a single point of failure and pretended we hadn't. We underpaid you. We undervalued you. We used your skills without honoring them. I'm sorry. I learned more from that one bad day than from 5 years of leadership workshops. He also asked if I'd be willing to do a talk for their engineering leadership about how to never lose another Eli. I said yes, not for them. For the engineers still there, quietly holding the place together like I once did. I walked into the same building where Karen once told me to know my place. This time, no badge, guest pass, consultant fee. I stood in front of managers who used to see me as just an engineer and put one sentence on the screen. She has a master S in business. You're just an engineer. Then I put a number under it, $24,300,000. Projected cost of lost contracts, regulatory penalties, incident response, reputational damage, all triggered in 46 minutes because of the mindset behind that sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attack. I just connected the dots they'd refused to see when there was still time. If you've made it this far, here's the part that's actually about you. Not my salary, not my company, you. If anyone tells you to know your place when you quietly keep the lights on, believe them. Not in the way they intend. They're not telling you your limits. They're showing you theirs. They're telling you how far they're willing to go to understand your value, how much disrespect they consider standard, how little imagination they have about what might happen if you decide to leave. You can't fix that mentality from your chair. You can only choose how long you keep sitting in it. You have 2 options. Option 1, stay. Hope someone wakes up. Hope the 3% turns into something meaningful. Hope the just gets dropped from how they talk about you. Option 2, leave, professionally, cleanly. On your terms, and let the systems you built and the knowledge you carry teach them what you were worth when you're not there to discount it yourself. The VP at your door 46 minutes later isn't validation, it's confirmation. Confirmation that you weren't crazy. Confirmation that you weren't asking for too much. Confirmation that just an engineer was always a lie they told themselves to feel comfortable underpaying you. Respect doesn't come from degrees. It doesn't come from titles. It comes from the people who know how fragile everything really is. Choosing to stay. Choose places that understand that. And when someone says, know your place, remember, you always have another one waiting. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.